Hey everyone, James here, going to be talking some more about Poliziotteschi today. I have been planning this video for a while now, and this one is called the 12 Essential Poliziotteschi. By no means kind of a definitive list. I think different people are going to make different lists when you talk about this. But what does that really mean? What are we talking about essential here? In my opinion, these are sort of the 12 films that if I were to give someone sort of a crash course into the genre, try to cover a lot of different ground as well as the major directors here. These are the 12 films that I have selected today. Not saying that won't change, it very well might, but just a variety of films that kind of sum up the genre, but also kind of offer a little bit of the different flavors of the Eurocrime and Poliziotteschi. So I suspect a lot of people watching this video may not be as familiar with Poliziotteschi or some of the other videos that we cover, the films we cover in this channel. So real quickly, the Roberto Curti book, which is kind of like the big book, English language book on the Poliziotteschi Eurocrime genre, kind of covers the years 1960 to 1980. You'll see there's a little bit of variability there. There's a couple films that came out just a year or two before, and there are a couple Eurocrime Poliziotteschi films that came out after 1980 as well, or towards the tail end of there. It's not necessarily a super sharp cutoff in the way that maybe spaghetti westerns is a little bit sharper. And it really coincides with the years of lead, which also coincides with the time when Italian genre cinema is really peaking. If you look at sort of the production of Italian genre films, or just Italian films in general, it really peaks in 1975 and starts to fall off pretty rapidly after that. So by the time the mid-80s or the 90s come around, the industry is really quite in shambles compared to what it was certainly in the 70s. So the years of lead, what is that? That's basically like this period of great unrest and turmoil. There was a lot of kidnappings, a lot of assassinations going on, things like that. And so why does that matter for here? Well, I think compared to other genres, Italian genres specifically, so things like the spaghetti western and the giallo, the Poliziotteschi Eurocrime films were really about stuff that was going on at the time. A lot of the films were taken directly from the headlines. You have a few directors, we'll talk about them later, like Damiano Damiani, who is actually trying to make some real social commentary and things, I think a little more elegantly. Other people are making social commentary and perhaps a little more crude things. There are films like a set of vigilante films which are kind of really, in my opinion, developed in parallel with Death Wish rather than inspired by them, that kind of feed off of the frustration of the times and just kind of the danger of the streets and things going on then. And so the Eurocrime film really gives that sort of like contemporary feel in a way that the spaghetti western, while it can talk in sort of allegories and things like that, can't exactly tackle head on. And giallo, which is more of kind of a middle class genre, and we talk about the big giallo directors and the way they went, and it's more into the surreal and fantasy. People like Dario Argento and Mario Bava, of course, kind of taking it to very, very stylish extremes, and not necessarily things that are grounded in super reality. So yeah, this is one of my favorite Italian genres for sure. There are certainly some Italian genres I care less about, so I don't really care as much about peplums or their post-apocalyptic films. So for me, these are closer to the comfort films along with those other two genres I mentioned earlier. And I think you could make the case that basically this entire genre, with perhaps the exception of Investigation of Citizen Above Suspicion, is really underseen. One of the best well-known Poliziotteschi films, Caliber 9, only has something like 10,000 views on Letterboxd, so not really a whole lot. And Criterion did bring a couple of the films onto their channel, and you know, a lot of them are fairly accessible these days through Canopy in the library or something like Tubi, but it's not a genre that has gotten enough love. So I would make the case that even though I'm going to be talking about some of the most well-known Poliziotteschi Eurocrime films, they're still underseen in a way. Okay, so why make this list? Well, in my opinion, these lists are really, really helpful. For me, at least, when I was first getting into different genres or things, it's really easy to just watch one or two and then be done. But if you have like a list and you see like 20 different people's 10 favorites or things like that, that's really, really helpful. So I just want to be a part of that and hopefully try to kind of capture that spirit to move forward. I mean, these days you have Letterboxd. When I was first getting into this, I stumbled upon like something like this ongoing 14-year, or maybe it was even longer, thread of Poliziotteschi Italian crime films on the spaghetti western form, and so that one was really helpful. And I just remember kind of scrolling through right before the pandemic and then in the early pandemic, and just finding all kinds of stuff to watch. And you really could find a ton of different films there, especially if you are good at tracking these films down. Okay, yeah, so let's see a little bit more. Yeah, this genre as well is probably very much kind of like in the spaghetti western lineage. The great Mike Malloy documentary, Eurocrime, kind of spells it out that way. You have a lot of people crossing over from those films into these films, people like Tomas Milian, to a lesser extent, someone like Poliziotteschi, but Franco Nero, of course, too. And I really wanted to kind of just sum up the genre as well as I could. So there are a couple films that you could make the case, certainly, that the Eurocrime Poliziotteschi films, but for me at least, they don't quite fit neatly enough, so I decided to exclude them. So things like Hitchhike is a good example. So yeah, let's just get into the list, and hopefully everyone can find something, a film or two to watch. Okay, so first up I have Confessions of a Police Captain, 1971. So this is probably a riff on the title of an investigation of a citizen above suspicion. But in this one, you have two characters that are both on the law enforcement side, and it sort of interrogates the morality and the ethics with there. I think it also correctly captures sort of the frustration that people will have towards kind of interrogating the mafia. So Damiano Damiani, really interesting director. He has recently had a bunch of his films restored by, or Blu-rays released by Radiant Films, so kudos to them. Unfortunately, this film was not amongst them. I'm just guessing that was something where people are, there's some behind-the-scenes stuff going on, because I think this film has just a really, really great reputation. This one also has the added star power of none other than Django himself, Franco Nero, as well as Martin Balsam, so a really good kind of American character actor there. This one's set in Sicily, like a lot of the Damiano Damiani films are, and it's a good crime thriller. It's definitely more on kind of the serious side. So if you're trying to show someone that may not be as into the grindhouse elements and is kind of more into kind of the social commentary and things like that, this would be a very good film. In fact, this might be a film that I would want to talk about my friend Iñaki with, just because I think these sorts of themes might resonate a little bit more. It's Damiano Damiani, a little bit more of a quote-unquote serious, classy director than someone like, I don't know, let's say Umberto Lenzi, who flirted with the cannibal genre and is more willing to go into the sleaze. Not to say one is better than the other or anything like that, just that different people are going to gravitate towards different things. Next up, I have Caliber 9 from 1972. This one is the first Fernando de Leo Eurocrime film. And if you're to list maybe the top Eurocrime director, Fernando de Leo very well might be the name that comes up. And his background was as a writer, and more than any of the other directors, he's very influenced by noir, which is something you don't necessarily realize just because the vibe, the look of these films is so different than like kind of your classic 40s, 50s, black and white American noir films that are coming out. Nonetheless, you can sort of see that root if you look for it in terms of like the convoluted plotting and things like that. This one has a fantastic soundtrack, one of the best by Luis Bacalov. It's got a great performance from Gaston Mochin. It has another genre stalwart, Mario Adorf, in it. And it's just a very twisty, churny kind of Poliziotteschi, and definitely one that, I could rewatch quite a bit. And in my opinion, one of the true classics of kind of the Poliziotteschi Eurocrime. So if you have never seen Caliber 9, do yourself a favor and check that one out. Definitely one that people are going to run into if you start Googling around even just a little bit. Next up is the second part of Fernando de Leo's Milieu trilogy, and that is Italian Connection from 1972. This one actually stars Mario Adorf, who was in Caliber 9 too, as a pimp. And it's a little more action-oriented. It's pretty different from Caliber 9 in that sense. And I have, Iñaki included, there are some people I know that will lobby the criticism that he's a pimp, so he's very, very dislikable. For me, at least, it's not necessary for me to 100% like the different characters. And I think that might be sort of something that people that like this genre will resonate with them. Just the fact that a lot of these films have a lot of dislikable scumbags, and it's following them around. So for me, at least, I don't need likable characters. Some people might, so maybe Caliber 9 is a better go there. But for me, at least, this is one of the absolute best Eurocrime films, too. In many ways, I like this even more than Caliber 9, even though I think it might be, a little simpler in a way. And I could very well easily list 4 more DeLeo films. This is the last one that I'm going to list. The last part of the Milieu trilogy is also worth watching. The Boss, Kidnap Syndicate's also great. Blood and Diamonds is also really, really good. I think that one's underrated as well. And he even did what could be called kind of a capstone for the Eurocrime genre in the mid-'80s, Killer versus Killers, I think is what it's called, which also stars Henry Silva and is also fantastic in a way. Anyways, Italian Connection, some of the best action in this side of Enzo Castellari, and it's done in a different way than Castellari would do. Speaking of Castellari, next up we have High Crime, 1973. When people are talking about the films that sort of really help to popularize the genre, 3 films that you're going to run across that all kind of came out in the same period are Execution Squad, Violent Professionals, and High Crime. They all are kind of like these more cop thrillers, focusing on the cop part of it. And in my opinion, High Crime it might be the most notable of them. I like the other 2 quite a bit too, Execution Squad in particular, but I think High Crime is probably the more essential of those. And Castellari, when you're to put kind of the directors there, he is far more of the action director. So if you're really, really interested in capturing kind of the kinetic action and a lot of slow motion, he's kind of like somewhere in between John Woo and Sam Peckinpah in style. But he's just a really great stylist. So the action is fairly different than something like the Italian Connection, for instance. This one also has Nero doing a very different role than Confessions of a Police Captain, and would also be responsible for kind of spawning Maurizio Merli, who I am not including a film for, but would become kind of one of the defining faces of the genre, where you basically have this Dirty Harry styled cop. High Crime, you sort of see the roots of that too. Castellari loved American films, so if you want to, you can watch French Connection and this, and you'll see some sort of very similar shots that they're going for. So this is, I believe, the first Poliziotteschi Eurocrime film that Enzo Castellari did. He will be appearing again on the list. It's not my favorite necessarily, but I think it's quite good, and it's very typical of a lot of films that would come after it. Next up, I have Revolver. This one is a Sergio Sollima film, who I would kind of put in the Damiano Damiani camp. Unfortunately, he only directed 2 Poliziotteschi films, both of which are quite good. Violent City with Charles Bronson, and Revolver, that stars the great Italian action star Fabio Testi, and Oliver Reed. This one also has a great Morricone score. The 2 leads have great chemistry with each other. It ends up being a little bit of a travel picture where they are going from Italy, I believe, into France at a certain point. Very, very cynical film. Like Damiano Damiani, Sergio Sollima is saying certain things about society. Really makes his mark here. Big fan of Sollima in general. He didn't direct enough films, but all 3 of his spaghetti westerns are worth checking out as well. Okay, next up I have Tony Arzenta. Speaking of spaghetti western alums, this one is directed by Duccio Tessari, who is well known for directing the 2 Giuliano Gemma Ringo films, both of which are quite good too. This one stars none other than French megastar Alain Delon. If you are looking for, I think Quentin Tarantino compared this film to Les Samurai. I would not make that comparison necessarily. It's pretty different, and I think you're kind of setting the film up to fail in certain ways. Nevertheless, I think this is a really nice star vehicle. You have a legitimate, huge star, Alain Delon here, and basically playing a hitman. Again, so those are the comparisons to Les Samurai, but it's told in a very, very different style than the Melville film. And yeah, they go all around, travel all around Europe and stuff like that. So it feels a little bit more of a bigger picture. But yeah, I like this one quite a bit. It's been a few years since I watched it. I know that Radiant Films is releasing a Blu-ray soon or now. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that film again too. Okay, next up I have another Enzo Castellari film, none other than Street Law. This one kicked off the subgenre of Italian crime films, the vigilante ones, which some people credit Death Wish with inspiring this film, and perhaps it did in a way, but I tend to think, as I said earlier, that they were developed more in parallel. And in Italy too, this is a very controversial and somewhat maligned subgenre that that happens here. But there is some social commentary. I think you could argue that it's certainly muddled. Castellari as a director is certainly no Damiano Damiani. Nevertheless, his action is really, really good, and I think the frustration that he captures amongst Nero really does capture something, and it does say something about the time. So you could criticize the social commentary and where it ends up going legitimately for sure, but I think there are still some things that you can take out of it. And personally, I like this film a lot. I think it has some of Castellari's best action. I don't think it's his best one, but we will get to that in just a little bit too. But yeah, I really like this film. I think if you're going to watch any of the vigilante films, Street Law is definitely the one that I would pick. Okay, so next up we have another interesting one. And why is this one interesting? And part of it is because is this a Poliziotteschi? And I think it's enough of one that I would include it here. And that is What Have They Done to Your Daughters by Massimo Dallamano. He also did What Happened to Solange, which came out I think a couple of years before there. And that one is more of a giallo. And so what would happen is there's this like very mini minor train that happened around the mid-70s. In fact, I wonder if this film is the original one to kick it off, where you have these basically giallo Poliziotteschi combinations. And I like both those genres, so they're fantastic for me. Another good one that came out around this time is Suspicious Death of a Minor and Calling All Police Cars. So they're just a really, really nice Eurocrime mashup that if you're expecting a giallo, you might be a little disappointed. If you're expecting a Eurocrime film, maybe you're a little disappointed too, because we're kind of getting into a little bit of a different territory here. Nonetheless, I think this is a very well done one. I could have picked Suspicious Death of a Minor. I think I like this film maybe slightly more. But all of these films pretty much came out right around the same time, 1974, 1975, and it's a nice mix-up. So if you are into Jolly and you want to see the two genres intersect a bit, I would say What Have They Done to Your Daughters is a good one. You have the sort of iconic view of the killer riding around with a motorcycle helmet obscuring them. So, good stuff there. Next up, we have one of the most infamous of the Eurocrime Poliziotteschi films, and the only film I'm going to bring from Umberto Lenzi, who I would say is definitely one of the kind of 3 or 4 most essential directors associated with the Eurocrime Poliziotteschi film. That is Almost Human. This one also features a absolutely unhinged, fantastic performance by Tomas Milian. Lenzi directed a lot of romps. I think this one really elevates above that just because of the sheer nastiness of this character. If you like relatable characters that you can get behind and root, this is not your film at all. Personally, I don't care, and I find his appearance here, his acting here, to be absolutely compelling. His performance just top-notch. And this film kind of belongs in the lineage of watching a terrible person discover how terrible they are and how far they're willing to push things. It also has the great Henry Silva in kind of more protagonist role, which is interesting. I would definitely recommend this one. I think it's, if I had to lower this list from 12 to like 4 or 5, I'd probably have to include it too, just because it shows so much of kind of the genre. Also has a great Morricone score too, so it just kind of shows that even though these films might show the absolute worst of humanity at times, you still have one of the greatest score composers ever, perhaps the greatest composer ever, making the music for them. Okay, next up I have, in my opinion, the greatest action film of the Eurocrime genre, and that is The Big Racket from 1976, directed by Enzo Castellari. This one kind of covers like basically this youth gang that is terrorizing and basically kind of racketeering things. As social commentary, I've seen some people put this into the vigilante genre. For me, at least, it feels a little bit different than that. It eventually comes together at the end as kind of like men on a mission, taking revenge on this group there. Has a lot of great faces. If you watch enough of these films, you're going to recognize a lot of the different actors that play different kind of roles in these films. They would use a lot of the same people over and over again. Not necessarily all Italian actors, but some French or some other European actors too. This one is Fabio Testi, who is, I think, this side of Franco Nero, probably the best Italian homegrown Eurocrime star there is. And he's really, really good in this. And they're just, in my opinion, Castellari's action on here is what really makes this stand out. He's just firing on all cylinders. This is released with a slightly more uneven but also very good Eurocrime action film, Heroin Busters by Arrow recently. I'd recommend people check both of those films out. Okay, so next up I have what is a little bit more of a deep cut. Those last two are a little bit more deep cuts, and that is Rome, the Other Face of Violence. I have already reviewed this film on the channel. I think this is probably one of the most complete Eurocrime Poliziotteschi's there is. It just is kind of the total package. It's directed by Marino Girolami, who is actually the father of Enzo Castellari. I don't think he's quite the action director that his son is, but I think the whole clan, the Girolami clan, is taking a bit from each other. So the action is still really, really solid. There's a subgenre that eventually develops in these Poliziotteschi's too, where you basically have these shitty kids. Sometimes they're high schoolers, sometimes they're just out of high school, doing terrible stuff. I personally am not a huge fan of those. There's not a lot of them that I enjoy. I don't really enjoy that kind of youth angst and violence combination. Nevertheless, this one has a bit of that too, and I think this is probably my favorite of them. It also combines a lot of different genres and almost has like a Shakespearean quality to it. This stars Marcel Bozzuppi, who was one of the kind of chief actors, French actors in French Connection, who appears in a lot of these. He comes across as very serious. In my opinion, he kind of classes up the joint a little bit. This one also has Anthony Stephan, who for me is a little hit and miss, but I think he works well in this role, in kind of more of a limited role. Okay, and finally, last up, I have I Am Afraid by Damiano Damiani, 1977, along with Rome, the Other Face of Violence. This might be one of the least seen. And I think this one's really, really terrific. This is not set in Sicily, or is about the mafia, like a lot of Damiani's other films, but it's just a really, really good paranoid thriller. It's got Gian Maria Vogliante, good set pieces. The score is by Riz Ortolani, one of the great composers who would go on to work on Cannibal Holocaust. And I can't recommend it enough. I think this one's really good. Similar to Confessions of a Police Captain, I'd say if someone doesn't want to venture all the way into sleazy grindhouse affair, Damiani is the furthest thing away from that, along with someone like Sergio Solima. This is a nice, good, serious, it would probably play even pretty well at a festival film. So I would definitely recommend that one too. Okay, well, thank you all for tuning in. Let me know how you like this film, like this video. If you agree or disagree with certain of the films, I'm sure some people are like, what about this film? What about this film? So feel free to comment those below. It's helpful. It was helpful for me just to read different people's comments of what people thought were missing from other people's top 10 lists. So I hope I can provide some of that same spirit here. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and I will see you all next time. Cheers.